All right. In the previous video, we had a look at RSA as a black box. In this video, we'll be having a look at the math involved in RSA, and we'll be looking at RSA under the hood. And before that, let's try generating. Let's say I was Ron, and let's try generating my own public and private key, and let's see RSA how RSA encryption decryption works out. Yeah, let me just use OpenSSL to basically generate my private key. So yeah, OpenSSL. This is the command gentk key, and this will generate my private key, and this will be 2048 bits. So let me just try printing that out. Ron private RSA. So this is my private key in base64 encoded format, and uh, and using this private key, I can generate my, and this is something I basically keep uh, at my end very securely and safely, and I can basically generate a public key uh, using this private key. Since they both work hand in hand, like I told you, one undoes the effect of the other. So the command to generate the public key from the private key is this, and I'm storing it in a file called ron.pub. Let me try printing ron.pub, and this is my public key. So this is something I can share with Harry, and so basically, OpenSSL is a software library that provides really cool cryptographic utility functions that we can use at our end for our software applications. So basically, there you go. Let's say I'm Harry and I want to send Ron this message, and I have Ron's public key, which everybody knows. So basically, I have Ron's public key, and I'm trying to encrypt this string using Ron's public key. And let me try generating the encrypted output. And so this is the encrypted text that I'll be sending to Ron. So if I send this, uh, there's no one else who would be able to decrypt it other than Ron, because he is the only one who's possessing his private key. So this is the encrypted text that Ron would receive, and anybody, including Malfoy or anybody, like there's nobody who's going to be able to crack the code, and that's because only Ron has his private key, and using his private key, he's now able to decrypt what Harry sent him, which is my name is Tom Marvolo Riddle, and this is just to give you a bird's eye view of how RSA encryption and decryption works. Let's use smaller numbers to get a better feel of how this algorithm works. And before that, we need certain prerequisites, which I'll be walking through right now. So let's have a look at how many keys would be required to securely communicate in a group of n people. Let's say, let's simplify this to n is equal to 4. Let's say we had A, B, C, D. And in symmetric, if we use symmetric cryptography, we basically would need like one case basically for every pair that's possible in this group, because let's say we assign the same key for AB as well as, let's say, some AD. That means D can actually snoop in AB's conversation. So that is something we do not want. So we have to assign a unique key that for every pair, and we have like NC2 ways of doing this. Like for example, for 4 people, we'll have 4C2 ways of doing this. Isn't clear, just try working it out yourself. Like this number would be AB, then AC, then AD, then you have BC, you have BD, then you have CD. So essentially 4C2 is basically 6, and we'll be getting KS1, KS2, KS3, and so on, KS6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So essentially, we need 6 symmetric keys to securely communicate in a group of n people. And if we, in this, for the same problem, if we used asymmetric key cryptography, that is, if you use a public private key pair, then try guessing how many keys you'd be requiring. In that case, uh, we won't be thinking in pairs. Like I mean, we won't be thinking. Like we won't try pairing people like the way we did in symmetric key cryptography. In this case, I just need to manage my own pair of keys. So basically, I just need to manage KA plus and KA minus, which is my private key and public key, and I'm good enough. Like, and the other person can use my public key to encrypt whatever he wants to send me, and I'll decrypt it using my private key. So that works. So essentially, I just need this, and I'm good enough. Like, so this simplifies the problem a lot, and I hope you're able to appreciate why asymmetry uh, is like special, because I just need 4 key pairs in this case. So a total of 8 keys, but like a 4 key pairs. So this you'll be able to appreciate it a lot more if let's say n becomes 1,000, and in this case, let's try calculating how many keys you'll be needing in the case of 1,000 people, which is will be 1,000 C2, and 1,000 C2. From what my calculator tells me is 1,000 C2 is 499K. So we needing those many symmetric keys in symmetric key cryptography, whereas in asymmetric key cryptography, I would just need 1,000 key pairs. By key pair, I mean a K plus and a K. So I hope now you're able to better appreciate asymmetric cryptography. When as n gets bigger and bigger, the number of keys just like grows. The difference just grows, becomes very significant. Let's quickly go over some prerequisites. Let's start with the fundamental theorem of arithmetic. It simply states that every integer, every integer greater than 1, uh, every integer greater than 1 is either a prime number or it can be represented as the product of prime numbers. For example, let's say we pick a number 42 arbitrarily. It can be represented as a product of 2, 3, and 7. So, product of prime numbers, because all of them are prime. And even though the ordering may differ, but note that if I have just 1, 2, and 1, 3, and 1, 7, I'll be getting no other number other than 42. So, and this is true for every single number greater than 1. That is, it's either a prime number or it can be represented as a product of prime numbers. This is sort of a big deal if you think about it. And let's go to one-way functions. One-way functions are functions which are easy to compute in one direction, but hard to compute in the other direction. A real-world example of this would be the toothpaste. Like it's easy to just squeeze out all the toothpaste out of the tube, but it's very hard, or rather impossible, to get it all back in the original state. And yeah, so mathematically, like a good example of a one-way function would be a cryptographically secure hash function. Let's say it's something as strong as SHA-256. Um, let's say it's hashing your password, and it's giving me some hash. And yeah, so given this, there shouldn't be a way to actually get back to my password. So, and this is just an arbitrary example. And by a proper one-way function, I'm talking about a cryptographically secure hash function. And yes, then another example would be like if I pick very large, say, prime numbers. Let's say I pick prime numbers that are like 500 digits long, and I multiply them, and get n. Let's say I'm picking two prime numbers and I'm getting n, and p and q are very large, and that means n is large as well. And given n, it's pretty much really hard to actually get back p and q. And by easy and hard here, I'm referring to, I'm talking in terms of computational complexity. Uh, in fact, the strength of many of the cryptographic algorithms actually depend heavily on the existence of these one-way functions. So, if someone in the future, say, tells that finds out that using some clever algorithm, or let's say people are talking about quantum computing, right? Let's say going back becomes easy, like let's say factoring of these factoring of this number is no longer as hard as we thought it was, then our our algorithm would just fail. In this case, if factoring of n becomes easy, straightforward, and we're able to get p and q, then RSA would no longer be secure. And similarly, there's also another problem called the discrete log problem, and uh, the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, which is another algorithm to actually exchange keys, wouldn't basically be secure if discrete log uh, was actually solvable. I mean, like it's easier to compute basically. Then let's talk about this. In fact, what I was talking about, the exactly same thing was the exact same thing was actually a challenge by the RSA lab. So all these that you see here, RSA 2048, all that, that's basically n. That's really long and really very long, and they basically wanted you to compute p and q, and they wanted people to actually come up with all kinds of clever tricks to actually see if they can actually compute p and q, and know that even though this challenge the prize money is no longer open. I mean, the challenge is closed, but still, for very large numbers, um, people have still not been able to find the P and Q for that particular n. So uh, this number is actually 617 decimal digits long. So, and the prize money was 200K. So you can think about how computationally infeasible it is currently, and the strength of RSA relies on that. Then let's talk about something called a trapdoor one-way function. Trapdoor one-way function is actually exactly the same thing as one-way function, ditto, except that it is actually possible to go back. Like it's possible to uh, go let's say we're going from A to B. It is possible to go from B to A under a special condition, or when there exists a trapdoor, like with the help of a trapdoor. Uh, with the help of a trapdoor, or by a trapdoor, I just mean some kind of special information. For example, in the language of cryptography, this would just mean this would simply mean, let's say I'm actually encrypting my message to get C, which is my cipher. And the strength of cryptography lies in the fact that any intruder wouldn't be able to actually go from C to M basically. But the receiver has to be able to do this, right? And how does he do that? In the case of asymmetric cryptography, it's by using something called a private key. So in this case, the private key is basically a trapdoor. So trapdoor one-way function is basically exactly the same thing. It is actually easy to go from one direction to the other, but it's very difficult to go from in the other direction, except when you have a trapdoor. Except I mean, other than the fact that it's only possible if you can use a trapdoor. So that is that. Let's talk about modular arithmetic, or clock arithmetic. It's called clock arithmetic because we use it by calculating time in our everyday lives without us even realizing about it. Uh, an example of that would be, let's say, what is 4 hours from 9 o'clock? The answer would be 1 o'clock. And how did we do that? It's just 9 plus 4, 13, 13 mod 12. We take the mod 12 of it, and mod 12 is basically 1. And how do you get 1? Basically, modulo operator is just the reminder. Yeah. So 13 mod 12 is 1 because when you divide 13 by 12, the remainder is 1. Uh, Another example of would be what is 10 mod, the percentage operator, and just writing mod are equivalent. So 10 mod, let's say 7, and this is 3. So this is modular arithmetic. And then let's talk about Euler's Tolkien function, and it's denoted by in case this is not visible, it's phi of n. Um, so what is phi here? Uh, this Tolkien function basically it's equal to the number of uh, numbers that are it's equal to the count of numbers that are less than n, which are co-prime to it. By co-prime, it means relatively prime, and relatively prime as in there should be no other common factor other than 1. So an example for this would be what is pi of 14? Pi of 14, let's list down all the numbers. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and what is 5n? Like all the numbers that are co-prime to 14. That is, they shouldn't have any other common factor other than 1. And so the numbers are. So let me just strike out what all cannot be. 2 cannot be. 4 cannot be the list. 6, all even numbers will be struck out. So that leaves me with also 7, because 7 has a common factor with 14 and the 7 itself. So the numbers that are left are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So 5 of 14 is basically 6. So 5 of 14 is 6. And yeah, also like this 5 function is multiplicative. That means 5ab is equal to 5a into 5b. And also another interesting property is for any prime number, um, p, 5 of p is basically just p minus 1. If you think about it this straightforward, for example, what is 5 of 7? 5 of 7 would basically be 6, which is p minus 1, because every number less than that is also co-prime with 7, because 7 is prime, and that is pretty much the definition of prime number. That is, like it has no common factors other than 1. And so that is Euler's torsion function. And let's talk about Euler's theorem now. And let n be a positive integer and m be an integer that is relatively prime to n. So m is an integer that is relatively prime to n. Then this holds m to the power phi of n, where phi is the torsion function, Euler's torsion function of m to the power phi n is basically congruent to 1 mod n. And that is what Euler's theorem is. And let's try modifying it a little bit. Since we have 1 on the right hand side, we can basically multiply it k number of times and it'll still be 1. So if we do that, then if we multiply k times, then we get m to the power k times of phi of n is still congruent to 1 mod n. And then let's go one step further, and then let's multiply both sides by m now. And so if we do that, then m into m to the power phi of n is going to be congruent to m mod n, and we can write the LHS as yeah. So essentially, what I did here is just I added one more m here, and this is going from here to here. So basically, we have m to the power k phi of n plus 1. We can write this is pretty much this same. And when you do that, you get m here as well. So yeah. So m to the power k 5n plus 1 is congruent to m mod n. Now we know pretty much everything we need to know to actually generate the public and private key. And let's see what the RSA algorithm looks like now. All right, now that we know quite a bit, let's have a look at the RSA encryption and decryption procedure. And let's assume that Ron the receiver, has already generated his public or private key pair, and he's basically publicized KR plus, which is his public key, and he's keeping this secret, which is KR minus, his private key. KR plus constitutes two integers, e comma n. Here e is basically the public key exponent, and KR minus is represented by integers d comma n, and d is the private key exponent. So essentially this e and n everybody knows, and d is something that Ron keeps it to himself. Then let's have a look at this. The sender, Harry, first encodes this message into a number m. Generally ASCII encoding is used, but we can use any encoding of our choice. So let's say I'm trying to send the character D, then I would just use 4, because it's the fourth letter of the alphabet, and so on. Just like let's say the message is hello, then I substitute the number for H, then E, then L and L until I have a number. So M, and once I have a number M, I use this to encrypt. I use Ron's public key to encrypt, and this is done by raising m to the power e and mod n, and this is the ciphertext. So essentially, this is what we did when I meant k plus kr plus of m. This is essentially m to the power e, raising m to the power e, and this is my ciphertext. And we send the ciphertext to Ron, and Ron now uses his private key. So basically, he uses D, and he raises this ciphertext to the power D, and takes mod n, and then this is where it's interesting. When you raise like c to the power d, because you've chosen e and d in such a way that that this is where the magic happens. That raising c to the power d and then taking the mod n magically gives us back the message that that Harry sent you. So Ron gets Harry's message. So essentially, what is happening at this step is you have C. C is basically m to the power e mod n. And the next step, after Ron gets this, he raises this to the power d, and this is the same as m ed, m raised to the power ed, e times d mod n. And this is where the magic happens. And this is actually equal to m, the message. So we'll take a look at this with the help of an example. And what did we do here? We essentially did use Ron's private key and use it on the cipher. It is essentially undoing that and getting back our original message. So the public key is basically an open lock that Ron sends, and this private key is his key for the lock, which only he knows. This is basically a key. So let's work this out with the help of an example. Note that I'll be using very small numbers here, like as evident, we're using very small numbers. But in practice, this is actually implemented with the help of very large numbers. So like factoring and all that takes time, and also like certain other standards may be followed, like adding padding to the message, etc. But just to make calculations easier, I'll be taking small examples, and we'll be able to internalize the algorithm better that way. So let's say I want to send the letter D to Ron, and D would basically be the fourth letter of the alphabet. So I'll be making the encoding 4 to represent D. And now to generate my ciphertext, I'll have to use Ron's public key. And so essentially, this is E comma N, and this is D comma N. So E is 5 and D is 11. E is the public key exponent, and D is the private key exponent, which is known only to Ron. So I know Ron's public key exponent, so I can use this m to the power e mod n to actually generate my ciphertext. So 4 to the power 5 mod n is 14 here. And what will this be? What is 4 to the power 5? 4 to the power 5 is 1024. What is 1024 mod 14? 1024 mod 14 is basically 2. So 1024 mod 14 is 2, and 2 is the second letter of the alphabet, which is basically B, which is what I'll be sending Ron. So even if Malfoy finds out the letter B, there's no way he'll be able to decode that I'm actually sending the letter D to Ron. So, and now Ron receives it. Ron receives the ciphertext, which is C, and and this has an encoding of 2, since it's the second letter. And now I'll be performing this. So 2 to the power D. D is something only I know, and 2 power 11 mod 14. Let me try finding out what it is. What is 2 power 11? 2 power 11 is 2048. mod 14, and this comes out to 2048 mod 14 comes out to 4, and surprise, surprise, what is 4? 4 was our 4 is what Harry sent on the original message, which is T, and that is the magic of RSA. With the help of KR plus and KR minus, Harry was actually able to send a message that was encrypted, and that is something only Ron could decrypt it. So this is essentially our trapdoor. Basically, it was easy to go from M to C, and to go back from C to M, we needed it. It is very hard unless we have Ron's private key, which is K minus, and that is our trapdoor. And so if you do not have this, there's no way you'll be able to decrypt it. And that is how RSA works in a nutshell. And let's have a look at how these magical numbers that one is an open lock and other is the key, how E and D are actually generated at Ron's end, how Ron is able to do that. Now, so let's now have a look at how Ron would generate his public or private key pair. Here Ron is the receiver. Okay, so let's pick large primes P and Q. These can be like 1024 bit numbers or even 2048 bit numbers, and then we compute n. We compute n, which is going to be P times Q. So just to demonstrate it, let me pick small primes. Even though in practice we prefer large primes, let's pick P and Q as let me pick P as 2 and Q as 7, and n in this case would be 14. And this, it's okay to let people know about this, but P and Q is something we keep to ourselves as a secret. So let me just mark it in red so it's clear. And this is actually known only to us. Next, we compute phi of n. And what is phi of 14? Phi of 14. To compute this, we know that this is actually phi of 2 times phi of 7. Just to refresh, phi of AB is phi of A times phi of B. And since we picked n as 14, which is 2 into 7, so it's going to be phi of 2 into phi of 7. And notice that 2 and 7 are primes. And that is why we pick prime numbers, because we know that phi of a prime number is just p minus 1, which is 1 times p minus 7. This is 6, which is 6. That gives us phi of 14 as 6. So I hope you're able to appreciate why we picked large prime numbers, because to compute, even though n is n is known to everybody, to compute phi of n, it's very time consuming unless we know p and q, the original prime numbers that generated it. And because they're prime numbers, and if we know them, then we can compute phi of n easily, because phi of p is actually p minus 1. So then we pick E. To pick E, we need to satisfy two conditions, and E has to be a number in between 1 and phi of n. We just computed. So let me just make space. Phi of n we computed happens to be 6. Write it down. Phi of n is basically 6. And we need to pick E such that it lies in between 1 and phi of n. And also the second condition is that E should also be relatively prime with phi of n. So that means E and phi of n, the GCD has to be 1. So E and phi of n have to be relatively prime. They're relatively prime, or they're co-prime. So if we can meet these two conditions, then we can pick E. So in our example, like E has to be a number between 1 and 6. So because 5 and 6 And so the choices of E are 2, 3, 4, and 5. And also E and 5 of n, they have to be co-prime. That is, they should not have any common factors other than 1. So that makes me eliminate 2, and 3 also has a common factor with 6. And 4 is also eliminated. So the only choice is 5. That's why E we have to pick as 5. Because all the other choices don't meet our criteria. So E is 5. So that's step 3. Let's move on to step 4, which is determining D. And D is determined in such a way that DE is congruent to 1 mod phi of n. And D is also called the modular inverse of E mod phi of n. And D is actually calculated efficiently using extended Euclidean algorithm. But we can also calculate D like this. Yeah. So notice that we had something like m to the power ed mod n, and we have to make it somehow equal to m. I mean, we have to choose d in such a way that this becomes m, and we can use this, the Euler's theorem slightly modified. We arrived at this in the previous slides, where m to the power k5n plus 1, and this is equal to m mod n. And we have this basically. Just write it down. So we have m to the power ed mod n from the decryption step, which has to be equal to m. And we also have this LHS, m to the power k phi n plus 1 mod n. We know that that is equal to m mod n. So that means for our magic to happen, I hope you're able to appreciate that ed has to be equal to k5n plus 1, which means d is going to be k phi n plus 1 divided by e. So since E is actually known to the public, the only thing that keeps D still a secret is the fact that phi of n is also a secret, and phi of n can be computed only if we recollect that we computed phi of n using p and q, and if we are not able to factor n and to get the prime factors p and q, there's no way an external person will be able to compute phi of n, and that is why, like, RSA depends on this. RSA actually, the strength of RSA lies on the fact that this phi of n can only be computed efficiently and computationally. It's feasible to compute phi of n for large n only if we know like the original prime numbers that we picked, the p and q. Without that, we won't be able to compute d. And since d remains a secret, and since D remains a secret, then that means this is our trapdoor. That is, only if we know D, we can actually go from C, this is C, to M. So we can go from C to M only if we know D. So let's compute D right now using this. So we already have an E to be 5 in step 3, and D is going to be 5n plus 1 by E, and K can be any multiple. Let's see our options. So D is basically 8 times phi of n. Phi of n was phi of 14, which is 6, and so it'll be 6k plus 1 divided by 5. What are our possible options? So let's substitute k is equal to 1, 2, 3, and so on. Let's see. Let's let's go. If we pick k is 1, then 6 plus 1 by it's not an integer, and so this is ruled out, and this is ruled out as well. And k cannot be, trying out values of k cannot be 3, k cannot be So 24, yeah, k can be 4. If k is 4, then that gives me d as 25 by 5, which is 5. And if d is 5 and my e is also 5, it doesn't make my d secret. So this, even though it's an integer, uh, it's still going to be ruled out, because I want my d to be I don't want anybody to be able to find out d from my e. So let me just keep going, and then let me substitute ds5. It's not an integer. ds6, it's again not an integer. ds7, not an integer. ds8, not an integer. ds9, ds9, it works. 6 nines are 54. 54 plus 5, 55. 55 by 5, 55 by 5 is 11. And there, now I have a suitable candidate for D, and now I have my D as well. So let me just write it down. I had my E, I had my E, and now my D is 9. Sorry, D is 11. K is 9 and D is 11. There. And now we have our public key and private key. So our public key is basically just AR plus, which is N, which is EN, and this is actually 5, 14, and we also found out DN to a procedure that's known only to us, and that is 11, 14, and that is what we used in the previous step when we had to actually compute. When you had to actually send the letter D from from Harry's end to Ron's end. That is what we used. We used E as 5 and D is 11, and it worked like magic. The open lock and the key, it worked like an open lock, and it worked like a D worked like a key, and E used the open lock. So now I hope you have some idea of how a public and private key pair is generated as part of this procedure. And let's have a look at a website that actually implements RSA. Let's go to relentless.com, which just happens to be a domain name also owned by Amazon.com. So let's go to certificates and let's check out the details. If you can see here, the signature algorithm that Amazon.com uses is SHA-256 with RSA encryption, and there are a lot of parameters like not valid before, not valid after that you can play around with. But let's have a look at the public key info, and it says it's RSA encryption, and the public key they've used is right here, and this was the public key exponent, and this is pretty common. It's actually just the value E we were talking about. That is very commonly taken as 2 power 16 plus 1, which is 65537, and this is the key size that's used, and this is the key usage: encrypt, verify, wrap, derive. So the point I'm trying to convey here is RSA, even though it's been a lot of years and since it came out, and people have been trying to attack it, and hence like we have to use a large number of bits, like 2048 bits and 4096 bits and so on. Even though the number of bits are increasing to still make it work, but it's still fairly used. It's still used in practice, and it's super useful. And I know that was a lot of numbers in one video, but I hope I provide enough content to enable you to appreciate the beauty of RSA and why it was such a big deal when it came out. Thank you for watching.